One of the 5 criteria of a well-formed outcome is the question, is it in your control? And when something's not in your control, it doesn't mean you give up on it. I want to be rich. Sure, I want to have a best-selling book, but those things are not in my control. What is in my control is to think about what can I do now that's of interest to me that is likely to move me in that direction. I'm not going to get attached to that because it's not in my control. I might get attached to the thing I can do now. And so for uncertainty, being able to say, what do I want to do now that is in my control, that will move me in that direction, can be just like something you can come back to again and again.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us at the Leadership Podcast. And remember, for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. My guest for this episode is Dr. Josh Davis. He's a cognitive psychologist and internationally recognized speaker whose work focuses on the science of peak performance, habit formation, and how small shifts in behavior can lead to outsized, transformative results. He's been featured in the Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Psychology Today, and in my Forbes column. In addition to his research and writing, Josh is a strategic advisor to organizations and leaders looking to apply cutting-edge psychology to real-world challenges. He's co-author of a new book titled The Difference That Makes the Difference. Dr. Josh Davis, welcome to Leadership.
Thank you so much for having me here.
In the context of personal transformation, what does the difference that makes the difference actually mean?
Yeah. Well, if you think about changes that you've wanted to make in your life, whether it's professional or personal, you can want it for years and never get anywhere. And then you can also have those major things in your life, like suddenly a breakthrough and how do you talk to your kids, or finally you're going to the gym, or you actually do start that new business, or whatever that challenge is, or you do write that book. It does happen. And so change can happen often very quickly and in a lasting way, even when it can feel impossible for years leading up to it. What the difference that makes the difference is about is figuring out what for each person and in their specific context is that piece that either gets in the way of change or enables it. So if this is about a process for quickly dialing down into someone's mental model about the situation they face and finding what that piece will be that will actually enable them to make change.
So the difference would be different for different people.
That's right, it will be, which can make it sound like, well, great, what do I do with that? But it's because there's a process. There's one process for finding the difference that makes the difference.
Now, the subtitle of your book is NLP and the Science of Positive Change. NLP, of course, stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. It's a psychological approach that explores how language, behavior, and neurological processes interact, and how we can use that understanding to improve our lives. In layman's terms, please explain NLP.
Yeah. So NLP is a collection of tools that come from the world of psychotherapy. So you had all these psychotherapists, now this is 50 years ago, creating new forms of therapy like cognitive therapy and family therapy and ACT and Gestalt therapy and hypnotherapy and so on. You don't have to know all those names. But the point is, all these forms of therapy that in the last 50 years have been researched, they've been time tested, they really can help people make changes in their life quickly and often in lasting ways. And what NLP did was to study a number of these pioneers in these forms of therapy and to try to identify how do they use language and how do they pick up on language that their patients are using. And then also expanded to nonverbal communication, and also expanded to what are the beliefs that these therapists hold and help people to hold. And so it's not something that any one person kind of created. It was this wonderful kind of mapping of what are these greats in the world of change doing, and then trying to make it something where anyone can follow that. What my co-author and I, what Greg and I have done, is we've tried to take a lot of these ideas that can be very complex and to make them simple to understand and simple to apply. So, you don't need to be, this is taking it out of the world of therapy for day to day. Let's say you're, a lawyer or financial advisor or a manager in a business. The specific challenge I have, I need to communicate effectively with someone. How can I use these tools? How can I apply it in my day to day? So simply, at least in a simpler way of describing it, NLP is a collection of tools for very quickly identifying what's going to help someone make a change. And the reason it works is because it's based on these 50 years of time-tested techniques from psychotherapy. But we've tried to make it very simple to apply and to understand.
So how does NLP help uncover the hidden drivers behind, say, resistance to change?
Yeah, so I think an example will help. I don't know if there's, you could even try this on yourself right now, Roger. If there's something that you feel like, well, a part of me wants to do this, but a part of me doesn't. It could be something as simple as a part of me wants to go to this restaurant and a part of me doesn't, but it could be a bigger thing. Like, part of me wants to, move and, go live in the islands and a part of me doesn't, right? Whatever the thing is, if there's some internal resistance, anytime there's resistance, we tend to fight ourselves. We tend to just try to marshal our arguments and say, oh, I just need to get over this. Or, what's wrong with me? Or, if only I just want it enough. But it's not about wanting it enough. That's a common misconception. It's not about wanting it enough. What happens is that when we resist something, we always have a good reason. And there's a belief that we encourage people to presuppose in all situations from NLP, which is that every behavior has a positive intention. So behind the behavior, there's some positive reason I'm resisting. Even if I'm just procrastinating doing my work, it's not because I'm trying to sabotage myself. It's because procrastinating does something positive for me. Maybe I'm trying to feel like I have choices over my time. Or maybe I'm trying to minimize the amount of time I have to put into something I don't like. And when we're dealing with other people, it's similar too. If you think about behaviors like a bully, right? You're like, how could that be positive? Well, the bully has a positive intention behind it. They want to make friends. They want to feel powerful. Those are positive things, to make friends and feel powerful. When you identify the positive intention behind the behavior, you can make a breakthrough often very quickly because you speak to the positive intention. You try to serve the positive intention. So with the bully, how else can I help them feel powerful? Or how else can I help them make friends? With myself, and it's procrastination, well, how else can I feel like, don't have to just be a slave to the work, or how else can I make sure I don't put in too much time on this piece of the work that I don't care about? Or if it has to do with this positive intention, if I'm resisting, doing this thing that I love about, like, I want to go and live in the islands. Okay, how does it serve me to resist that? Well, I want to make sure I maintain my connections to my friends and family. All right. Well, unless I address that, I'm not going anywhere. So when we find the positive intention, and this is really at the core too, right now there's so much polarization politically. Whenever you're able to get yourself to a place where you're looking for the positive intention behind something, behind someone's point of view, you can actually speak to them and find a breakthrough.
So it's about reframing.
It is. There are many reframes that you'll find in NLP. And so you can reframe the purpose of what you're doing. You can reframe your role. You can reframe the intention the person has. You'll find that this is one of many reframes that can be very powerful that you'll find in NLP.
How do you distinguish between superficial change and deep, lasting transformation?
I think it's all about being open and curious about what's going to be useful. So if I'm working with someone, I will never assume that I've found the perfect thing. But what I'll do is I'll keep exploring. So somebody says to me, like, I really need to be getting, all of these reports done all the time, but it seems like it's taking me away from this other work. Okay. I hear them saying I need to. And so I explore that. Like that way of talking reflects a relationship with the work, that it's an obligation, that it's something I don't feel like, I want to be doing. I want to put my energy somewhere else. Well, what would happen if you didn't do that? What would happen if you did? And we start exploring. We start to unpack, well, how are they thinking about it? That's just one example. We can also get into how they think about themselves in that context. We can also think about what's important to them and so forth. And as we start to unpack these things, then we might find often it becomes transparent to them, not just, I don't need to do the work. It just becomes transparent to both of us what we might try shifting so that they'll make a change. Oftentimes, people will say, wow, I think that's going to make the difference. And you will see that from that point on. I've had this experience myself, change lasts, but you also will find that they'll say, that really feels like it'll make the difference. And they come back a week later and say, you know what, I tried it, and then this problem came up. So I'm never going to just assume that one thing you discover, but you always have the attitude that you can find it, you can make that change. And after enough tweaks, people do tend to get there, or they come to peace with not making a change, which is also a useful change.
It sounds like focused self-awareness is a real key here.
Focused self-awareness, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one thing that's helpful is knowing what to be aware of within yourself, right? What are specific questions of things to be aware of? Because I can be aware that I'm angry, or I can step back and take a third person perspective and start to be aware of the situation that led to my anger. Those are both self-awareness, but the second one is going to help me make new meaning.
Sure. The impact that your anger may have on people you really care about.
Exactly.
So how do emotions like fear or uncertainty factor into people's ability to make meaningful changes?
Yeah. So here too, someone practicing NLP well would not assume that fear or uncertainty are good or bad, but would explore whether they're useful or not in the particular context. So there are certainly times where fear gets in the way and uncertainty makes us crazy. And there's other times when they motivate us. And I can remember a long time ago, I was 18, I had a herniated disc in my back. And it wasn't like, the worst. I was laid out for months, it took a while to heal, but it wasn't, I knew this was not going to be a forever thing. However, I do remember one thing. I went to see this one doctor. He's testing stuff out, and he's like, you'll make a pretty good recovery probably.
Pretty good.
I mean, there'll be some limitations. You'll never swim the butterfly, and so that was the perfect thing for me to hear. Because in my case, I was just like, oh, I'm going to prove you wrong, right? That was exactly the motivation I needed. For someone else, it might have made them crumble, right? It's about the person and about what taps into their needs. I'm someone who has to mismatch to see the way in which something might not be true. So he said that to me, and I was determined. And of course, I went and swam butterfly. Right. And really got into it. And really, so, had he not said that, I probably wouldn't have worked as hard at it. And so the point is, so then fear, you specifically said fear and uncertainty. With uncertainty, a lot of the time, this may be common for many people listening because there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We really want to try to control the future. Like AI, we're all so uncertain about AI, what's going to happen. Or it could just be uncertain about the cost of things, because we know it's impossible to predict right now. And that's going to have a big impact on us, though. And so when something is actually uncertain, then trying to control the future is a fool's errand, right? However, that doesn't mean that we should just take our eye off the ball and say, well, I don't care about the future. But it does mean that it's important. It becomes even more important for us to do work on what in NLP we'd call a well-formed outcome. One of the 5 criteria of a well-formed outcome is the question, is it in your control? And when something's not in your control, it doesn't mean you give up on it. I want to be rich. Sure, I want to have a best-selling book, but those things are not in my control. What is in my control is to think about, what can I do now that's of interest to me that is likely to move me in that direction? I'm not going to get attached to that because it's not in my control. I might get attached to the thing I can do now. And so for uncertainty, being able to say, what do I want to do now that is in my control, that will move me in that direction, can be just like something you can come back to again and again.
Well, I think you're touching on it, but I have this question. What's the psychological difference between trying harder and trying differently? You've used the example of best-selling book. So let's say somebody is interested in having a best-selling book and they haven't written a single word yet. How can they try differently rather than try harder? What's the difference?
This is also taps into one of the foundational beliefs of NLP, which is we've paraphrased it in our book as, if at first I don't succeed, try something else, right?
Right.
Just try again, right? And that is an important distinction, that when people are successful, they're often not just beating their heads against the wall. If I beat my head against the wall and the wall doesn't fall down, maybe that's not the way to get the wall to fall down, right? No.
Yeah, you're just going to have some bumps on your head.
Exactly. So I try something different. And, yes, there are times when trying harder is the different thing. It's like, well, like I need to use some force and I just didn't use enough force. Sure. But experiment. What happens is that the way that the belief is phrased in NLP originally is that the element in the system with the most flexibility is the most likely to get its needs met. And that this runs counter to what a lot of people intuitively think, like, well, if I want to get my needs met, I need to be rigid and strong and demand, make everyone else flex to me. But, there may be 1 or 2 times where there's just a one-off interaction, a transactional thing that's only going to happen one time, and you can just kind of bully your way through it. Fine, I agree, that can happen. Most of our lives, we actually want to continue to have relationships with other people. And if we treat them that way, they're not coming back, right? So we do need to adapt a little bit. But even in a one-off situation, it's very common that if I'm open to, let's say, hearing what matters to you, and not demanding, it's like, okay, well, I mean, if you take a classic business school negotiation, right? I come in and I say, I want to buy your company, right? And then you're supposed to be the seller, but you know some things that I don't know. Well, if I keep on saying, like, I've got these great arguments about why I'm the best buyer, I'm offering the highest price, I'm going to give you the biggest profile, I'm going to make your company name live on, but maybe that's not what matters to you. If I can continue to be flexible and explore what matters to you, I might discover that what really matters is that your family members are taken care of, and you really don't care about any of the other stuff. You want someone who's going to be a caretaker for what you've created, and make sure that the people who matter to you can really continue to be a part of it. And not any price, but you know what I mean? That it's not about the time.
Sure.
And so like when you can come in and have that attitude, then you can explore, you can approach everything as an experiment. And you can be very curious about, well, what is going to matter here? And I'll tell you, here's one really silly, simple thing where this played out in my life big time. So we have young kids, 9, 6, and 2. And so we have the issue that most parents have with young kids of how do we get them out in the morning? We need to get them to school or get them to camp, right? How do we get them out? And, and it can be this maddening process. And so we're trying different things. We try being strict. We try having, if you do this, then you get that. We try punishments. We try everything, right? We try waking them up earlier. We try waking them up later so that it's a rushed thing. And finally, 2 weeks ago, it dawns on me, look, we're arriving 10 minutes late consistently, right, to this one particular camp that we're doing. And if it's consistent, something's happening. So my wife and I start trying to unpack what has been happening, what actually is there something that's happening like 10 minutes after we want to leave that's actually happening? And sure enough, we honed in on it. We're like, oh, that's the point when we've been saying it's time to get in the car. So we tried moving that 10 minutes earlier. We didn't know if it was going to work, but we just kept experimenting. And finally we did that. And sure enough, in our particular case, that has worked every day for the last 2 weeks, right? It's just literally saying, hey, it's time to get in the car, with like actually meaning it too. Like, it's time to get in the car because it is time, right? And then we actually have gotten out. So that attitude of like, how am I going to make this happen? And continuing to experiment is what we're talking about. That's what's going to enable you to, if you take on that attitude, you're going to accomplish nearly everything.
Well, sure. And you've discovered many times that your family is a laboratory. And I'm sure you've also discovered that 3 children from the same gene pool may have very different approaches to things.
Yes.
So it's a fun trip, let me tell you.
Uh-huh.
So, Josh, what are some...
You have 3 also?
We have 4. We have 12 grandchildren, and we have 4 great-grandchildren.
Oh, my.
So,
wow.
So we've seen that play out many, many times. It's fun.
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Roger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
So what are some common traps that people fall into when trying to change habits?
I think the most common trap is to believe that it's all about the behavior. It's like, I just need to get myself to do the new thing, like, and willpower, and I just need to get myself to do it a bunch of times. Because there is some truth to the fact that, yeah, you do need to repeat things to make them habits. But a lot of the time I find people know what they need to do. You know, if you've got someone and they're saying like, you know, I just need to be more disciplined. I know it. I just need to be more disciplined. Or I just need to put my work out there. Or, you know, I just need to get to the gym more often. Well, paradoxically, what they're really telling me is they don't just need to get to the gym more often. They don't just need to put their work out there. They don't just need to be more disciplined, because they already know about that.
Sure.
And they're obviously not doing it for some reason. So then the interesting question is, you know, what's stopping you? And another great way to get at that is, how does it serve you to not do that thing? And you start to unpack a lot about what's getting in the way. Often it's stuff that you can address, but you just haven't addressed it before.
Well, and it gets back to the idea of not just trying harder, but trying differently. If you're trying to lose weight, but you have this wonderful addiction to ice cream, and you walk past the freezer, and you know you shouldn't open the door to open the freezer because there's ice cream in there. Well, one thing you could do is stop buying ice cream. And then when you walk by the freezer, you're not going to have that temptation.
That's right.
I mean, you know, take it step by step and really consider, you know, what's getting you in this fix? What's in, you know, it's your own choices that get you in that fix typically.
It is.
So, Josh, how can NLP be used to improve workplace culture and team dynamics?
Yeah, well, I think here there's just what feels like an endless collection of tools for communication, because so much of it has to do, so much of NLP is about interpersonal communication. It can be applied to how you communicate with yourself and how you help yourself, but it really stems from interpersonal communication. So number one thing is, for leaders on the team, it's great if everybody does this, of course, but certainly for leaders on a team to start here, is to remember that every time you want to influence someone, it's important to start by assuming you need to earn the right to influence. Because the situation in their mind, you may have a trusting relationship, right? And you may have some emotional bank account to burn, right? To burn, to use, to spend down, fine. But if you go into every single interaction assuming that my first step is to earn the right to influence, you start out by trying to ensure there's rapport. Because unless someone's open to listening to you, they have to choose to listen to you. They have to choose to change their behavior, have to choose to change their attitudes. All you can do is suggest things to them if they're open to it. So step one, get them open to it. Earn that right. And that comes from finding ways to show them that you understand their reality and getting in sync with them. And so I think it's both in terms of what you say, but it's also non-verbally. When people like each other, they talk more like each other, right? They move more like each other. We've all seen this. You pick up a little bit of an accent of somebody else when you're talking with them if you like them. That's a real thing, and it goes both ways. If you show that you respect someone's world enough to start to talk a little bit more like them and breathe more like them, honestly, the nonverbals, it has this effect that people say, okay, this person acknowledges my reality. They get me a little bit more, and they're more open to talking. But so if you've got your mind on how can we get in sync, is there rapport right now? And if not, how else can I respect their reality, get in sync? You earn the right to influence, and then you really have opened the doors to all kinds of, whatever you need to do. There's a lot more you can do, but that step is so crucial.
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of leaders seem to think that they have the right to influence by virtue of their title. They really haven't earned that right, as you say.
Mm-hmm. And I ask them whenever I get the chance, how's that working for you?
Yeah, how's that working out?
Exactly.
So in your research, Josh, what have you found about attention management versus time management?
Okay. So we are not dealing with computers in our heads. So a computer, it really is about if you have a certain amount of time, you can run a task. With a human, it's not like that at all. And everyone who's listening knows that they have some times when they're on fire. They're doing amazing work. They're getting incredible things done in, a single morning that they thought could have taken them 2 weeks. And other times when they're just getting nowhere and just dragging their feet and they can't seem to put words together. And it's each of us are very different people at different times. We really don't have the same abilities. It feels like you have different abilities at different times. You do. You don't always have access to your best. And so what we can do is start to become aware of what things wear us out and avoid them right before an important task. But we can also plan ahead a little bit better and realize we're not going to be able to do everything. Nobody's going to be able to do everything anymore. You are going to have to let yourself down or let somebody else down to some degree. And it's a question, if given that, let's find ways to think about what really matters and give our best to that. And what people find, in my experience, is when you do that, you end up being able to serve even those people you were worried about disappointing even better. So, for example, let's say I have an important podcast to do. And I could say, all right, I've got 10 minutes right before it. Let me just use this time effectively, right? And check my email and make sure there's nothing that needs my attention. Okay, well, if I check my email, I'm doing a lot of decision-making, unimportant decisions, but still decision-making. I'm also triggering various emotions. I'm also thinking a lot about and just reacting to whatever I've just read. So now my mind is on a totally different space.
Right.
I'm becoming mentally fatigued, and I'm in this emotional state, which is just not a useful one for a podcast, right? So that is self-sabotage. Right? It's not because I'm trying to sabotage myself. My positive intention was to use the time well, right? But it turns out what I'm doing is neither using that time well or showing up well for the podcast. But what happens if I show up well for the podcast? I allow myself to be mentally fresh. I am focused on what I want to communicate. And I choose an emotional state. And by the way, you can choose to a much greater degree than many people realize. I choose an emotional state that's really going to help me be present and thoughtful and dynamic, how I want to be in the podcast. Well, then it's going to be a much more useful podcast for the audience and for me. It's going to help me accomplish what I need to accomplish as a writer, as a speaker, as a coach, right? And that handful of emails,
they're going to wait.
They'll wait. And I'll be able to think, I'll be able to come back when I'm in a big picture state of, are they even worth attending to?
Right.
Which I couldn't do in that quick moment. And so we can learn to use our brains effectively so that we get to what matters most and we don't waste time on the stuff that we don't need to.
It seems to me that this kind of mindfulness can become enough of a habit that we don't even need to consciously think about it. It becomes the way that we approach situations. Is that correct? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. As much as I practice this stuff all the time, and I really do, I fall into it still, more than I'd like to. I still find myself at times, just because we get reactive, we get on autopilot. I start going down that path of wasting my time or wasting my energy, right? And not thinking about what really matters. I know, but I can catch myself now and step out of it, and I have things. Right. So then I can, and I know how to step out of it so that I can then take the big picture perspective, refresh, and come back. Right. So it becomes much more automatic. And even so, at least for me, this will be an ongoing thing forever. I'll need to keep on being aware of it.
So it seems like it's a matter of focusing on what really matters in the moment. That doesn't mean that other things don't matter, but in the moment, we focus, like you said, preparing for a podcast rather than checking your email and going off on some tangent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I find in the moment is, very important to do that. What many people don't know is that once you're on autopilot, and even here, just having this podcast is a kind of autopilot. You and I are paying attention to each other, reacting to the questions. We're not thinking about everything that's really important in our lives right now. We have these rare moments in the day when we're not on autopilot, where it's just like, what do I do now? And it tends to feel uncomfortable because we feel unproductive. Those are actually special moments to change, to reframe, to think differently about. They're called decision points, or I call them decision points. And those are moments when we can step back. We have the ability to actually see the big picture. When we're not engaged in a task, when you have to stop because the podcast ended or because you got interrupted, right? At those moments, the mind kind of comes to a crossroads. Autopilot breaks down. You actually become more conscious, and you're able to step back and see the big picture, think about what's important. If you take advantage of that moment, step away from your desk until you remember what's important and then choose what to do, you will use the afternoon well or the morning well. That's how you don't waste time. You let yourself get started on the wrong task, autopilot kicks in, you can waste 3 hours. But if you take that moment, which doesn't have to be long, for a decision point, then you can really use your time well.
Seems that this approach is very liberating.
It has been for me and for a lot of people who've reached out to me. Yeah.
Well, Josh, you are a PhD psychologist, and you're co-author of the book, The Difference That Makes the Difference, is a trial lawyer.
Yes.
Interesting combination. How do your backgrounds complement each other, and what did you learn from your co-author's application of NLP in the courtroom?
Yeah. So it was wonderful to have somebody so different. And also, if you meet Greg, we're very different in terms of personality, in terms of so many things. But we both came to it with these NLP beliefs of, let me try something different. Let me be curious about the other person's mental model. And so it enabled us to keep challenging our assumptions and be ready to write a really much better book where we included the useful things and in useful ways. So, I'm coming to it explaining the ideas and the tools, and Greg is saying, here's how I've used it. This is how but he's also able to, in his words, he likes to say, to dumb it down, to say, okay, I need an example here, or, walk me through the steps. And so some things like in trial law, Greg is frequently in a situation where he needs to either be communicating with another lawyer or with jury or with the judge and so forth. And if he remains curious about their perspective, he finds that here's one of the NLP beliefs. The meaning of your communication is the response you get. So we're saying it's much less about what you intended. What matters more is how it landed. So if Greg's coming in and he's saying, like, I've got the best argument, you don't get it, right? If he's got that attitude, then he ends up alienating the other side. But if he's got the attitude that, okay, they're having a certain thought right now or a certain reaction, somehow I contributed to communicating that. Something I did moved them in that direction. So let me step back and try to find out what they're thinking I said. So sometimes it shows up in the way he'll ask questions. Sometimes it shows up in the way he's willing to be flexible and change his language. Sometimes it shows up in the way that if he's like doing a cross-examination, this was one example from the book, he tries to hold in mind this idea of the positive intention. So if he's got a witness and they've done something that's really, everyone would agree is a bad thing. If he's just trying to skewer the person, then they get very defensive and it's hard to get all the information that you need. But if he's able to hold in mind they have a positive intention, this person wants to stay out of jail so they can spend more time with their family, for example, right? Or they want to protect their reputation. They still did something and they have to be held accountable, but being able to be seen and heard allows them to open up and allows also the jury and the judge to kind of look on them with more compassion.
It almost sounds like using NLP in the courtroom is somehow similar to using NLP in raising teenagers.
Yes.
And that's not a put down to teenagers. It's about how to communicate with somebody and, bring out in them, with teenagers for sure, their very best. Send the signal you're not their enemy. You're absolutely not their enemy. You're trying to help them be their best selves. And in the process, you can help yourself be a better parent.
Yes. So then you end up discovering new ways of parenting. You have a lot of experience with teenagers. And I'm wondering if you even have an example in mind, not to put you on the spot, but I guess I am doing that.
Well, maybe. I remember when our son turned 16, he's in his mid-50s now. I said, 16, big 16-year-old. Boy, I can remember when I was 16, and I noticed his eyes starting to glaze over. And I stopped myself, and I said, it must be really different being 16 now, different from what it was like when I was 16. Tell me, what are you going through? What's it like to be 16? And he looked at me like, is this one of those consulting tricks here, Dad? And then he realized I really wanted to know, and he started to talk, and he's been talking ever since. So we have a very good relationship. So I don't know if that was NLP or not, but in that moment, I decided to be more self-aware of what I was doing and more aware of what I was trying to do to build a good relationship with my son, whom I love dearly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that is a beautiful story. Yes.
So,
I would hope that following NLP would lead someone to do exactly that.
Well, I didn't know it was NLP, but it helped. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Josh. It's been a pleasure having you as our guest on Leadership. This conversation has given us a lot to think about. For those of you who would like to know more about Josh and his work, go to sciencebasedleadership.com. That's sciencebasedleadership.com. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with your team, your network, or anyone else who's ready to make better use of their time and attention. And be sure to leave a review. Even a single sentence fuels the algorithms that promote the great content that the Leadership podcast offers. And for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.